On? Is this microphone on? Can you hear me now? Does checking, testing, 1, 2, 3. Light seems to be on. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Good. Can you hear me now? Good. It's been a long time since I led an in-person Synod assembly, and I had forgotten how bright the lights are when you're sitting up here in the front. It makes it a little hard actually to see the people, which is one of the reasons why we have people go to microphones. So I hope we can still have a pretty good interactive conversation, but please be aware that it is a little challenging for me to see you. So if you have something you'd like to say, it might be valuable to stand up. I know that inertia being what it is, especially on the second or third day of an assembly, makes one disinclined to try new things. But I'm assuming that everyone who's in the room now either intended to be here for the workshop that's happening at this point, or simply doesn't care and is willing to be part of it, whether they like it or not. The way I thought about my presentation yesterday and thought about this workshop today is that it would be the opportunity we had together to do some unpacking of the things, of the very, very many and fairly complicated set of things that I laid in front of you yesterday, which for me is still a work in progress. I don't have a clear conclusion about what to say is most important about the understanding of the church using the metaphors of nature, and particularly that of the tree, means for us. But I do think it's rich in meaning. That's the part I hope to get across, was that in the history of our time together as the Church of Christ through the centuries, that we have really explored this a lot. And we've come to some very different conclusions about what it means. The question for us, of course, in the present moment is how this is a fruitful image for us today or not. So before I get into listening to you, I want to say a couple things, a couple points of recap about yesterday. And one of them is why, more explicitly than I said yesterday, why I think perhaps in some ways the tree metaphor with rootedness, a trunk and branches and fruit is not an altogether useful metaphor for our life together as church. And the key thing, you probably, and some of you have figured this out already, is that one of the most important characteristics of trees is their immobility. They are literally rooted in one place. Trees do not skip like lambs, as the Psalms would have it. And in fact, the whole imagery of hills and trees dancing that we hear in Scripture sometimes is powerful because it is impossible, because it's outside the realm of the experience of nature that humans have ever had. So this is an issue, I think, a challenge. I mentioned 3 characteristics of the tree that I thought were useful. And this first one, stability, that I didn't emphasize that as strongly as I could have, but it's stability that is also, I think, problematic, especially in a church that exists within a society that is experiencing rapid change, as ours is. So that's one question I lay on your hearts. Let's think about what benefits are there to stability in the church, and what are the drawbacks to that? I'm sure that many of you have thoughts about that. The second characteristic that I thought was significant was the toughness of the tree. That is, strong trees can be more fragile than they look, but they are built to last, at least the species of trees that are long-lived. And most of us, when we imagine a mighty tree, think of one with a powerful, thick trunk and thick bark protecting itself against the elements. And there are certainly elements of toughness in our experience of church as well. Certainly the church has had to defend itself in lots of ways. But how is this also a multivalent metaphor? How is this both helpful and perhaps problematic at the same time? If we are tough against the threats, does that also make us impervious to new things? So that's, I think, also an aspect worth exploring. The one that's the least problematic is what happens in the crown of the tree, what happens at the top, the abundance in the branches, the leaves, the foliage, the shade, the fruit, all the things that the tree yields in its life again and again throughout the seasons. I mentioned how powerful the image of the California live oak was to me when I was bishop in Southwest California, and how I really loved traveling up the coast to the northern counties of the Synod, up the Pacific Coast Highway into the Central Coast wine country, which was part of my Synod as well. And seeing those live oaks out in the fields was always inspiring and exciting. Now I forgot what I was going to say about that. Oh, well, it was a significant, oh, I know what it was. It was a significant image to me, in part because that was one of the few places I saw really powerful trees that were native. They are actually a species unto themselves, the California live oak. But the tree that one associates with most strongly with where I live was the palm tree, which were all over Los Angeles, and we even had one in our yard, and which are not native. They're actually brought from the tropics. They're not native to California at all. And so they're kind of an artificial implant, and they are not a very good example, perhaps, for the kinds of trees we're thinking about in this Christian metaphor, because they don't, at least most of them don't produce much. They're not very deeply rooted, and they are, well, I just never saw them as being very useful. Somehow the live oak spoke to me of belonging, whereas the palm tree spoke to me of kind of the selfish desire of humans to decorate their land with trees they thought were interesting looking, but really didn't belong there. So there's that. Coming to Pennsylvania has reawakened in me the interest in the verdancy of the land that we didn't have in California. That we call it, when we want to praise it, we call it a Mediterranean climate, but it's really a semi-arid and in some places desert climate. And we know this, of course, from the drought and from the fires, that in some ways it's unsuited to the kind of habitation we put on it. In Pennsylvania, on the other hand, there is so much water and so much humidity and so much verdancy that even to step out my front door and to breathe in the air tells me this is a place where life abounds. In contrast, in the far southwest, the dryness is really palpable, and the sense that unless we work at this, we couldn't live here. This is a constant struggle against a climate that ultimately would kill humans unless they were able to control and manage it. So one of the things about using this sort of botanical or biological imagery for our faith and our church is that we have to think about where we fit in terms of survival. Are we suited to our climate? Is our church a transplant from someplace else that isn't native here? That and by here, I mean really more culturally than geographically. The Christianity is spread throughout the world, but is the kind of way we understand the church and we practice being church, is it suited to the culture in which we live? Keeping in mind that we are moving away from ideas of having a single dominant culture characterized by white people of European descent who are, for the most part, Protestants or Roman Catholics, and that our whole experience of our neighbors is different than at least the America that was held up as a model in the 1940s and 50s. and that we've really changed significantly. And do we still seem like a native as a church in this new and changing environment? So the big picture, the big question I wanted to put in front of you yesterday was, how can using these images that we've used in the past of strength and persistence and abundance, how can they equip us to face change, to face difference, to face newness in a way that is not afraid? And I wonder whether any of you heard or thought of any ways in which you could think of examples or experiences that this resonated with you in some way. Is there anyone brave enough to give some reactions? Yes, I see a silhouette in the far back. Did you want to? Yes, you should go right to that microphone. That will be helpful for all of us.
My name is Emmanuel Granson. I'm pastor of St. Marcus Truth Lutheran Church in Prince George's County. I was really moved by your presentation yesterday, and it just brought a whole lot of other things to mind about trees. In Africa, we say one tree does not make a forest, because if one tree was a forest and the wind came, the storm came, it would just blow it away. And when you were talking about the interconnectedness of trees and so forth, I thought about that. Also, growing up, there is this particular tree in other places in West Africa, but I know of Ghana. And this tree is called Odum. It's O-D-U-M. It's very mystical. It does not bear fruit. But every once in a while, the fruit that it bears is a seed. And it casts that seed at least 200 feet away from itself. Also, if you are a carver or woodworker and you cut that Odum tree and made any image, somehow that image would get a personality. The Odum tree had been even known to move at night, and so forth. So when I think about Ezekiel, chapter 47, 1-9, 1-12, about the different types of trees, or Revelation 22, I'm thinking about the Odum tree. And in your presentation, I had hoped that you would probably go a little bit to the ancient Near East and how they saw trees, particularly to Egypt. So I thought, oh, this is good, but it's really a Western presentation of trees, not only in European Christianity, but also in American Christianity. Mm-hmm. So just to respond to your question, how one continues to grow by learning more about trees, you have to do research now in Africa about trees. You have to, and by doing those researches, that would help you also to understand the church. There are churches in Africa that do not have buildings, but they are on the trees. Mm-hmm. People meet under those trees. So how then does one who has grown up from a totally different culture, tries to mesh, the ideas that you have presented, which are thought-provoking ideas, so that we can use it in a place like this? Because the Bible has now become a universal book, and people have to respond to it, in their own context and milieu. And how that works, I don't know, but I wanted to respond that way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. One of the powerful things about the tree image is that there are so many different kinds of trees and so many human experiences of them around the world too, but not, of course, every climate sustains large growth trees.
President Erwin, I had a question from yesterday's presentation, and then this morning, got a couple more now, but I'll start with the first one. Tomorrow's Trinity Sunday, mm-hmm. And I'm curious your thoughts how to take that metaphor of the tree as an image of Trinity and how that would work in your mind.
That, that I hadn't thought about that. I'm preaching tomorrow too. And I'm not completely done with the sermon. So maybe I can give myself some tips. I wonder, I've always wondered whether it's conditioning or something deeper that leads me to always think of things in threes. Whether this leads me easily into the Trinity, or whether this is something I learned from being a Christian. I have a colleague at the seminary who always, in any meeting, when he wants to say something, will say, just quickly, 3 things. And he always has 3 points. And I wonder how he does that, because not everything has 3 points. But I did that when I was talking about the tree from the 3 levels: the subterranean level of the roots, the immediate part above it, the trunk, which is fairly bare and fairly simple. And then, of course, in this archetype tree, this wasn't any particular species I had in mind, and then the verdant crown at the top. And in some ways, it occurred to me before this moment, but your question inspires me to wonder whether the root is analogous to God, the parent, God, the creator, the trunk to Jesus, who stands for us and with us, and the crown to the work of the Spirit in our lives and in our world. So you don't have to quote me if you decide to use that, but I might actually incorporate that in my sermon tomorrow. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, Dan Roschke at Bethlehem in Fairfax. I've been thinking a lot about dying and about I had an idea the other day that dying, as many of us know, in hospital rooms and things, it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have an answer here. I'm wondering, I think something's dying right now in the church, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But I'm just curious and wondering and sort of throwing out, how long is this dying period? And how long do we sit and wait and keep vigil as something's dying? And I'm thinking about that with the metaphor with the trees, and certainly different programs, different ways of thinking, older ways of thinking that are not something new, it needs to be born. But yeah, dying doesn't you don't just chop the tree. I don't think, or do we? Is that what we're doing now? So those are just some scattered thoughts that I'm having.
Thank you. That is a really rich and wonderful rumination, because we are really taking this metaphor and turning it in every direction and looking at it from every angle. But I think what you've hit on something really important is that the church is more like a forest than a tree, in the fact that it's always dying and always being reborn at the same time. And the process is a complicated one, because there are things that are important to us that seem to be in decline, that seem to be dying. And we don't have new things of equal importance that are growing at the same rate. So we are unsettled by what we see. And I think that anxiety needs to be recognized and named, because it's real. I want to give you, I don't know exactly how this connects, but I have a little parable about a tree that connects to that. And that is, on the campus of one of the campuses of the seminary I lead, and some of you probably know this directly from firsthand experience, but the one in Philadelphia, a few years ago, over a decade now, we built a new modern classroom and office building that was larger than anything that had been built on the campus since the library at the beginning of the 20th century. And it was a very large undertaking for the seminary. And as they were designing it to take the place of a much, much older building, they wanted to preserve a tree that was over 200 years old and had been on the original estate. The campus of the seminary in Germantown had been the estate of a wealthy pre-revolutionary merchant. And this tree was from the time of that original estate, so that next to the original mansion. And we don't know how old it was. I think it was an oak. But anyway, it was a massive tree and very, very beautiful. And they were afraid that building the new building would damage the tree. So they were careful to construct it. It was relatively close to a different building, to construct it no closer than the other building, in fact, farther away, and to angle the side of the building in such a way as that it missed the root ball, or at least the main part of the root ball of this ancient tree. They did all of that and built this building we're still paying for. And 2 years later, the tree died and had to be taken down. And now there is a stump, a low stump, about, well, it's at least as far across as the length of one of these tables, so 6 feet at least. It was I never saw it, or actually I don't remember having seen it. I know I had been on the campus before that, but all this happened before I came, and now there's just this massive stump. And it's really sad to think of all of the effort that went into avoiding this outcome and then causing it anyway. Perhaps, we don't know for sure, perhaps the tree had reached its lifespan. And but it haunts us a bit, because now there's an empty space that looks a little funny, and we've never figured out quite how to make this all harmonize, where the presence of that big tree was important. And perhaps there's a little bit of a metaphor in there for the church too, is that we don't know exactly how far gone it is. We don't know what parts of it will be there. We don't know what hole it will leave. And all these things are real at the same time. Come back around to Ron.
Evidently, there's a question online before I
Oh.
say anything.
Yes, who's monitoring the online? I didn't, but yes. Excellent. You're on.
Am I on or
Yes,
who's
you are.
on? Great. I'm Melody Mobley. I'm a member, deacon of outreach at Faith Lutheran Church in Arlington. And I'm a professional forester by training. And I just have 4 quick points I'd like to make, please.
Please.
First of all, I love your metaphor of trees and forest. I think it's so appropriate, and here's why. I was the first Black female forester in the United States, and I worked for the USDA Forest Service. Thank you. Thank you kindly. I worked for the Forest Service for 28 years, and 45 years ago, I was the first. Today, there are only 6 Black female foresters. So it's that, I see that as a metaphor too, because we're still striving in the Lutheran Church to become more diverse. And also, looking at trees, trees have a lifespan just like any other living thing. And we are, I call it slicking off, clear cutting all of the trees that are most valuable to the planet, our rainforests, both tropical and temperate, and replacing them with these monocultures of trees that do so little for the planet, like climate change and other issues. And finally, I think we're also not just losing species, losing that diversity if we ever had it. We're not always reforesting these areas. So as we lose our sacred people, we're not always able to bring in our youth. So that's a long-winded way of saying I so much appreciated your presentation. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a rich comment. We're grateful for your work. You're a hero.
Thank you very much. There is actually a movie being made about my life. If you go to www.starrya, STARYA.org, you can see the trailer for the film and learn a little more about me and send me comments. Starrya is my Cherokee name. I'm a quarter Cherokee, and it means stay strong, which being kind of a pioneer, I certainly had to be. And we all as people of faith have to be strong in our beliefs, yet malleable like the clay we used yesterday. So Thank you for letting me participate. I'm sorry I can't be there. My back is killing me today. But
Thank you for being here this way. That is a really valuable and rich comment. Thank you. I see. It looked like there was one more hand up. Yes, there you are. You're on. Annabelle.
Sorry. I can't tell with eye contact digitally what's happening. So just as you were talking yesterday, I just finished reading the book, The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Solem. And that book is really, really fascinating. And I appreciated you tying together some of the thoughts that I had while listening to it with your presentation. And it's great to hear from Melody too, to hear her experience and her thoughts about that. One of the thoughts as Pastor Dan was speaking about death is that as I was listening to the book, the trees that die, there's no attachment to that, right? They just become part of the humus, and then life goes on and it gives rise to other trees. And this community of trees, they're actually, mother trees and elder trees that care for the little ones. And as the little ones grow, the older ones die, and the cycle continues. But I think maybe part of, and you were getting at this, I think, with your parable, is that attachment. We put so much time and energy and effort into avoiding that the death or the transformation that can come from that, that we can't see that it's just part of the process of living. And I'm wondering, even as you're talking about the Holy Trinity, or I said Trinity, you could use that. That's a pun that you could use for later if you like. There are electrical signals that the trees are sending out. There are different pheromones, I think, and things that trees are sending out in terms of communication. And I'm wondering how that relates to the Spirit at work, tying things together, uniting us in a way that we can't see, but we can feel. That he talks about why taking walks in the woods, why the air feels different in the woods, and why that is so meaningful to us, and why we can feel that in our bodies and our souls, that it does us good. So I'm just wondering, these are all just scattered thoughts that I'm having as I'm trying to put all these things together. But I think there's so much to be explored there. And I really think it's a beautiful image of life together as community. And how do we move past that attachment to just be present with what is, and allow that to give rise to a whole forest of really good and beautiful things.
Thank you. That's really a beautiful reflection, and I don't think I need to comment on that, except to say there's one thing you said that really is evocative to me, and that is the idea of the energy with which the trees connect. And that reminds me of the phenomenon within our understanding of church, where we are so bound to what we say, what we can speak and communicate. We're very connected to our use of language in different ways. And we tell the world a story. We remember together every Sunday the story of salvation, but we do this in words. And that's not a bad thing. That's how we do it. But it might cause us to overlook all of the other ways in which we communicate profoundly without speaking. And that, I mean, this is not going to be new to you, but the whole feeling that one gets when one goes to a church, especially when a church one doesn't already know. And I can have somebody who's moved across the country and recently trying out churches is something I do. Of course, even in my professional life, I go to different congregations all the time. And I'll tell you that everyone feels different. And I can't put my finger on what that is, but some feel better than others. And we probably need to do a little bit more raising of our own consciousness of how our congregations feel. Because that's where the welcome is either convincing or not, beyond what you say to how it makes people feel. And there's no single answer to this. There's no one way to make it happen. I've been in congregations where nobody spoke to me, and yet I felt that I could belong. And ones where people were outwardly quite friendly that I ended up feeling were not. So it isn't as simple as that, but it's another thing we need to think about is what energy are we emitting when we're together as the people of God. Okay, we go to microphone 2 now.
Actually, that leads into what I was going to say about harmony, and I was going to try to react to the word stability. It seems that we as a church have really got to look at the stability, and unfortunately all this divisiveness among us, which each one is good, may cause unstable and not allow us to bring ourselves as a whole community together in order. And the whole concept that if you don't take care of yourself, how can you go out and take care of others, so to speak. And I know that I'm Roy Swift, Emmanuel Lutheran, that we try very hard because not everybody thinks alike in our congregation, and not everybody agrees on this. And if we didn't pay attention to that, there would be fractures. Not that we might not have some fractures, but paying attention as a church and as a congregation, I think may be extremely important, or we're going to lose the stability in this church. We cannot fight one another with words and say everybody's a racist and everybody's this. It's only going to hurt us and using those kinds of terms with one another, and it's hurtful. Even the person who may have very different thoughts that we have, but trying to move to this word of love and understanding. And we know the principle is that there's less animosity and discrimination after one has more interactions with someone. When they begin to view a person as a human being versus just a John or Roy or a Mary kind of thing, it's another human being. A lot of this animosity goes away because you see them as a human being versus the context of what they are representing. And so I worry about the stability, that the trunk is going to crack if we don't try to look at ways in which we can maybe not all agree, but at least move with some community of cohesiveness that we can all agree on. I'm really worried, to tell you the truth, that's what's occurring in our church today, because I think the trunk can crack very easily and we just all disperse.
Thank you, Ron. Yes.
I live in a Rapidan area on the side of a hill that just has a ton of mature trees. And when I moved there, because I love the forest, I love being in the woods, that's a happy place for me. And when I look at the trees, and I have a natural, the tree specialist person, I always forget big words, come out and help me understand what's going on with the trees. And since many of them are old, I don't know how to tell if they're dying. And to your question, is the church dying? Is it changing? It's an issue of evaluating its health and its benefits and its risks. And we all do that differently, right? Some of us see a huge tree next to a house and we go, that has got to go. And I have 4 massive 120-foot tall tulip poplars right next to our house. And when I talked to the tree experts, they said, well, they're all healthy And if you kill these, if you take these down, or one of them, the closest to the house, you will interrupt their root system and they will become weaker and they might actually fall. But right now they are very structurally sound trees. There are other trees that have many branches falling off. They're definitely dead branches. But they say, look up at the top. And if you see new growth, the tree is expending energy at the top to grow, and many branches are dying on the lower levels. So we just watch to see if where that energy is. And I think there's a lot of that changing in the church. What is that energy needing to go to? And it's different for each congregation. It's different for each tree and each ministry team and each function of the church. And then what's the risk? Is it going to fall on your house? How soon could it fall on your house? And arborists are really good at, they can't be for sure, but they're pretty good at knowing what the tree's up to. So what's that risk benefit and health analysis? And I think there's a lot of what trees are doing that we would assume is because there's death on the tree or because woodpeckers are attacking it. It is a dead tree, it is gone, but that's not actually what's happening with all trees. So how do we shift our idea of it's either alive or it's dying? Where's the energy? What's the benefit? What's the risk?
Thank you. And I think that lifts up also the fact that that because these are organic entities, they are living and dying at the same time, that they are always changing, that change in a way is a process of a gradual dying in some ways in order that new life can come. And trees, that is the most powerful part of the metaphor for me, is the self-renewing aspect of trees, which may not look much different from year to year, but are constantly kind of recreating themselves, as we are, as human beings as well. Let me go to this microphone next, then we'll come back to you.
Actually, I do have 3 points.
Good.
One is, I may have missed something yesterday, but I think this is the first time we talked about a tree dying continually. I mean, I'm constantly picking up branches in my yard that have fallen off my trees. And as the church, often we try to tape those branches back on. But we need to be, okay with saying these are dead and we need to throw them away. The second thing is,
I really like that branch. I want to keep it.
The second thing is the banyan tree.
Yeah.
This is a tree whose branches come back to the ground and root. And so I want to thank Pastor Branson, because I would not have thought of that had he not talked about other trees in other parts of the world. And so for me, if we're doing the, God the Father and then coming up to the Holy Spirit, that's the Holy Spirit coming down to the roots again and doing the whole cycle. The third point is, after this discussion, I cannot go with a tree as the symbol of the church, because we are a forest, and in our forest, we have to accept the transplanted palm trees and the banyan trees and the California oaks and the pines, and we have to keep them all from killing each other. And so a single tree really does not bring the diversity that we have in our church today.
Thank you.
I'm Caroline Sakuchi from Good Shepherd in Gaithersburg. And I was actually yesterday learned for the first time that something I'd never paid attention to, which is, I paid attention insofar as not wanting to trip, the root systems in a trail or something. And it never occurred to me that they actually were multiple trees' roots that were migrating and melding into each other. And I thought that was a really interesting metaphor for the way the church works together. I thought that was a really strong metaphor. And that's what actually keeps the forest strong, is the fact that, and trees strong, is the fact that the roots grow into each other. It's also what causes problems if you have plumbing at home and there's a root going. However, I also wanted to say something about what the woman who just spoke said, which is, I also don't know that the tree metaphor works for the church. I think it works well for theology, because I also agree that we are made up of forests. and forests grow, and then underbrush happens and things die. And then, you know, in order to have a healthy forest, there has to be some of that happening. You can't have everything growing and continuing in order to have a healthy forest. And I think that speaks to some of the things that, you know, we're dealing with right now. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, just to name the power of metaphor and all the ways that metaphor is a yes, and also all the ways that that we find ourselves pushing back on the metaphor. So, so just want to echo the yes of the stability of the tree, and also along with the recent comments, I'm pushing back too a little bit on the metaphor, not in favor so much, in my imagination, not in favor so much of for the forest, but wondering whether something like the vine and the branches, or an annual, or something that knows its vulnerability in a different way, whether the image of the tree is one onto which we can project, especially if the tree is an institution, to project an eternal quality that is not meant for the tree. Just thanks.
Let me just interject before I go to this other microphone that indeed it's important to keep in mind that we're speaking both literally and metaphorically, and that the tree that we see as the church is a really big thing. It's really not like a real tree. It's a super tree that has many aspects that are more complex. A lot lives in its branches that is not the tree itself. There's much in which its roots are embedded that is not the tree itself. So I think we can have it both ways. But one of the things I think we want to watch out for, and there's always a temptation in our society and our culture to do this, is to project too strongly an idea of our individual accomplishment, the kind of individualism and standing alone and being courageous and faithful and trying to bear fruit that we each try to do in our lives, projecting that kind of individualism too strongly on the solitary tree, because indeed we are a collective, and it's not about just the one, although we do look to ones who stand out in the field and who we admire and use as an example. But it is really a collective too. Anyway, go ahead.
Amy Farah from Grace in DC. I just wanted to say something about stability as a good thing, in that, yes, the world is changing all around us. There's a lot of unease, a lot of discomfort, alternative facts, all that kind of stuff. But the church as a tree rooted in place, we know what the truth is. We don't invest ourselves in alternative facts. And I think that human beings, or life in general, which has evolved over millions of years, we're not really made to change drastically in a short period of time. And we need those places where we have that comfort and support and strength and community and stability, where we see the truth and learn the truth and know the truth and preach the truth. We need those places to keep us going in this crazy world. That being said, stability does not mean sameness, but it does mean consistency. I'm acquainted with a community of Benedictine monks, most of whom are getting on in years, and one of the older members, they haven't attracted many younger members, so they're worried about their future. But one of the older members has told me that stability has been something that is the hardest thing for, it's a group of men, for young men to commit themselves to, because they think that it limits their options or limits their life. And he always tries to tell them that stability means to be, yes, rooted, but the community itself, you know, people change throughout their life, you grow older, some monks pass on, new people come. There are things going on around you in the world, but you have the stability of that community to feed you in your life of faith. And so I think we can learn from that we may not be doing the same thing all the time. We can't make an apple tree grow bananas or something, but we can be consistent in preaching the eternal, consistent message of God's love and mercy through time forever. So.
Thank you. Before I go to the next speaker, let me just say, I think you're onto something there too, that one of the attractive aspects of the church to many seekers is its connectedness over time. That it's not that just one idea is there, but that we are engaged in a long-term conversation across generations that does have some continuity. And that in some ways, I think people in our society seek that kind of connectedness in a meaningful way. But at the same time, I'm struck by how much our society communicates to every person, and especially to young people, that the possibilities are limitless in their life, and that to inhibit themselves at all is some kind of a mistake. That can sometimes get in the way of making wise choices between something of quality and something that is a passing point of curiosity or excitement. And I can just attest to that in my own life. I was not brought up a Christian, and certainly not a Lutheran. I didn't have any relatives who were active Lutherans, and it never would have occurred to me as late as when I graduated from high school that I would ever be a member of a church. And I came to it in college, really. At the same time, all the horizons of my life were opening up in exciting ways. And I really did feel, because I was extremely privileged as a college student to be in a extraordinarily famous and reputable school from which people went on to do remarkable things. And I had the example of my classmates around me, all of whom were wonderfully talented. And I thought the world was my oyster on one level, and at the same time really understood pretty profoundly that I didn't have anything I stood for or belonged to that was bigger and older than myself. And so I was torn both to explore and also to find some roots. And it was in that point that I became a Christian, was baptized, and became a Lutheran. That's another whole story how that came about, but it was in a way, and Lutherans back then in the mid 1970s, we didn't have our act together. We were several different Lutheran denominations who were characterized by different things, and the thing Lutherans in the United States have always been good at is disagreeing, and so in some ways not a model for evangelism. But I didn't find this off-putting. In fact, I found it in some odd way encouraging that Lutherans still cared. It meant that ideas were still important, that the teaching of the church was still important, that they took care to preach what they meant, and that there was a kind of commitment to that fundamental truth of the gospel that allowed for variety in some ways. And so I found that to be, for me at least, it was a place that had the stability I sought, but also had the openness to conversation that I didn't want to lose. So I think there may be something in that we can still gain from our experience of church. Anyway, back to Pastor
Thank
Jeff.
you. Jeff Wilson. I am a pastor at St. John in Riverdale. And Dr. Erwin, thank you for this metaphor and letting us kind of dwell and dig into it a bit. I do have 3 points around the terms adversity, resilience, and closeness to good and evil. And adversity, one thing that I've heard, and I don't know if it's tested or proven, is the idea that if you took a tree and completely isolated it from the elements, from weather, from wind, from any adversity, essentially, even if you tied it up so that it didn't even have to stand on its own, and then you were to take that same tree and move it outside into the normal elements, that it wouldn't be able to withstand storms, that it would just kind of fall over. Conceptually, that seems to make sense. But as you worked through the images of the bark, the trunk, the relative, well, not relative, but the stillness of the tree, that it's planted, it's rooted, doesn't look like there's a whole lot going on. And yet, in the process of just living, it becomes strong. In the process of going through the things that we mostly try to avoid, it becomes stronger. And that has been something I've been working on, is the idea of adversity, and that you don't necessarily want to avoid it. You don't look for it, obviously, but then, so that's, again, part of the strength of the tree, especially as you look at the church. How do churches weather the storm of COVID? How do we weather the storm of all of the things that people have mentioned that affect the life of the church? So then the second point is resilience. When I went to the rainforest in Guyana, we went on a tour, and the tour guide asked how much topsoil we thought was in the rainforest. And we're thinking, Midwest, we're thinking feet. He knelt down and brushed off some of the leaves, and there was rock. It wasn't even topsoil measured in inches. And to see the resilience of trees, and he talked about how long it took for trees and the rainforest to march its way across all of that rock. And again, on the ecological side of it, the concern about clear cutting and how careless we are with trees that have taken so long to grow, and that they have if we personalize the trees, that they've fought to expand themselves and to make this great rainforest. It just reminds me then of that resilience and the importance of resilience. Again, to the church, how do we root and how do we grow? How do we expand? How do we thrive in places that are not conducive to that, like the rock? And then the third point is from your graphics. I loved the pictures where there was good on one side, evil, or heaven, hell, whatever. But just reflecting on this morning, there's a very thin line between the two. The closeness of good and evil is actually remarkable. It's not like we in the church are so far away from evil that we are safe, right? So anyway, just those three comments have been ruminating in my mind. So thank you for, and I'd welcome any comments you have.
Thank you. I think that stands as it is. Thank you for those comments. They're very profound. But I want to go back to this microphone again. Are you ready for another comment?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Just some tidbits about African trees. There's a tree in Africa called the baobab tree. It has a big midsection, and it can be stripped for rope, and it's medicinal. The leaves are edible, the fruits. But when you look at it, it looks like the roots are really up and the branches are down. And the story is that it tried to trick God, and God turned it upside down. so that's how it looks like this. It's sad that the people in California really do not realize that the palm trees actually have wine in them. And you can get access to the wine through where the branches and the trunk meet.
Huh.
And you dig a hole and put a stick with a hole in it and some ember of fire, and put a pot at the bottom of it, and you have to leave it overnight.
Huh.
So the type of palm trees in California are actually female palm trees.
Mm-hmm.
The wine is sweet, but if you just think it's sweet, it can knock you out. And then there's the other palm tree that is male, and it bears red fruit. You can use the fruit for soup. You can use the oil that it creates 2 types of oil. Then the branches are used for basket, for weaving, for broom and all of that. And when the tree dies, then it turns into something else where mushrooms, really sweet mushrooms come out of it. So in West Africa, the palm tree is a symbol of economy because it generates a whole lot of other things.
That's
Also, the tree in Philadelphia, if it was in Africa, people would have talked to it before they started doing anything, because it's a living organism, you know, and you should have talked to the tree. So if you have trees, you talk to them. When you do that, you are not being demonic, you know, and they should have, you know, talked to that. Then also the idea of Trinity in terms of a tree. I first heard it from Bishop Tertullian, Bishop of Carthage in what is now Tunisia. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those observations. I'm thinking about that they certainly didn't talk to the tree, I'm sure, in advance, but the tree having been there for 120 years of the seminary's existence already, perhaps it had felt like it had heard enough at that point. I want to also make a quick observation about our other campus. On the Gettysburg campus, we have 2 trees that we think of as, they call them witness trees, because there is good reason to think those trees were there when the battle was fought in 1863. And we have 3 witness buildings and 2 witness trees. And we had 3 witness trees, but one of them died just the year before I came. And we were reluctant to take it down, even though it became kind of a hazard after a while, because it was a witness tree, and we wondered what it had seen, what we would do with the wood, whether the wood had meaning. I asked them to take it down carefully and preserve the wood as best they could, because I thought maybe we could make things out of the wood and use them as souvenirs. But as it turns out, it was quite rotten inside. It was almost hollow, and there wasn't a lot of good wood left in it. But the idea that the trees stand with the buildings as witnesses of the past was a powerful one to me. So it will be, also I think in the end, when the arborists finally examined the trunk, they determined that it wasn't a witness tree, that it was a little too young, that it had probably been planted after the war. But it was hard to tell from the outside without doing the autopsy on it that was necessary. Anyway, microphone 2.
Hi, Christopher Widener, Georgetown Lutheran. I want to say this is both provocative and playful. And it reminds me of 2 things really quickly. I don't know if anybody here knows the weeping beech tree. My daughter had one on one of her campuses, and she said that it was referred to as the kissing tree because all of the branches sprawled down and it created a room. And some of the guys and gals used to go in there, and who knows, guys and guys, would go and kiss. It strikes me as kind of an interesting metaphor for the church as a place where we can weep together and where we can be intimate together. And I think that kind of dichotomy within our church is something that makes some sense to me. Second thing, pushing back a little bit on the tree as metaphor, I've thought, since I was involved on a board of outdoor ministry, that one of the images for the church could be a tree house. So that, you know, in a sense, we are people of the tree, and that different trees can remind us of the life-giving tree of Christ. It's a place where we get away, we share some honesty and intimacy and maybe some conflict together. But above some of the fray, we get a far distant view of life and of something of God's life too. And we don't stay there forever. As fun as it is to be in a tree house, we get some of our identity there as we gather in different houses across the land, but we go back out And maybe we can be re-sustained by a visit back to the treehouse. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're close to the end of our time, but we have two more people. So I'd like to hear from you both. You can go first.
Hi, I'm Maria Green Coles from Emmanuel Lutheran in Bethesda. And I also want to push back a little bit on the notion of the tree, and especially the super tree, because of the notion of a tree as an organization as opposed to as a God. And I think the flattening of the structure and the way our youth and our younger folks view institutions is very revealing. And I think we need to listen to that. I just had I'm going to play a moment with the forest metaphor, but I like the treehouse as well. So I'm going to come back to that. I first want to say that in the forest, there is hope. I was listening to the bishop's words yesterday and how she is struggling. I remember leaving the church 40 years ago because of the patriarchy and the fact that there wasn't a place for me. There weren't words. Words have meanings. There was not words for me. And I had to decide whether I was going to go with the Mary Rutherford or Mary Daly focus in feminist theology, either be part of the church and change from within, or just start something out on the outside. There is hope, because I saw 3 women at the podium today, and that words have changed since when I started in the church. There is hope for my LGBTQA brethren. There is hope for my friends who are Black and brown. There is still hope for me that we can even use more inclusive language in the church. But there is hope in the forest. I also want to say that there's got to be more love in the forest. I appreciate all of our statements on diversity, and I appreciate what we're doing. Maybe you can tell by what is now bottle blonde hair, but I'm told that I was part of the frozen chosen in the Midwest. I did not know that until I came out here on the East Coast and was informed I was one of those Lutherans. I actually grieve for the demise of all the Lutheran churches in North Dakota. I grieve for what I am seeing, and I think we've got to have a lot of love within our church for those who don't think like this, who aren't there yet. And so I'm not sure if I'm worried so much about stability as I am the capacity of us to love for those who are not there yet, and how we can walk and be intentional in our care for those in the forest. I think we as a church need to find more love for one another and where we are at in our journey. The third thing I have to say, and I'm so glad I got that one off my chest, because that was it. The third is just that the forest has changed. It's changed. And I appreciated our colleague who talked about the Odom tree. Going online completely changed our church. It is not a building anymore. And that is really hard to think of. And it's hard to get that in our head, but it has been so liberating in some ways. And we're not there in terms of fully conceptualizing this, but the forest has completely changed. So there's another, we can talk about stability, but where are we today? Finally, I just want to say that maybe the church is, maybe we're talking about different types of trees together, but maybe we have a number of tree houses in that tree. If I want to play on that, because we are a community of communities, and we have to, I think, still move beyond the butts and the pews view and reaching out to people in the ways that we're doing now today, and how we value and understand how that growth and that change is occurring. Because being a community of communities is really wonderful, because there's many, many places then for people to belong and for people to create things. So I think being led by the Spirit and having an intentionality in doing that is going to help us ensure that this forest thrives in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll have one last.
One last, very briefly. Craig Frederick, abiding present. So again, piggybacking on what she just said, the forest has changed. And certainly from society's standpoint, since we moved from hunter-gatherer to agriculture to industrial to technology-based, our society's expectations of the forest has changed and how we value the forest. I'd just like to circle back briefly, and if you could just comment on what the title, what should a modern Christian community look like? What should a modern Christian forest look like? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. That's a good place to bring this back to the beginning. And I'm grateful for all of the reflections, some of which have really deepened the consideration of this complicated and imperfect metaphor. Since no one else chose to do it, I will finish this out with the bad joke about not being able to see the forest for the trees. And thank you for your contributions to this ongoing question. This is really not a place for answers, but a place to practice the questions in the hope that we can be arborists and foresters and whatever else we need to be to care for the people in the church we love, and to preserve the parts that need to be preserved, and to say a grateful farewell to the things that are at an end. And I hope that we can do that with grace, and most importantly, as we were just reminded, with love. Thank you very much for the love you've shown me in my time here. I wish you all in this synod and beyond the very best in the years ahead. Thanks for inviting me. I think lunch is next, and you know how to do that.
Hi there. That's it, yeah. And that's the other one on the desktop still. Thank you. Awesome.
After this video, this one was
That's fine.
I'm just listening.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So the first video is already cute, so all you have to do is and then so when you're done, that's the second thing right here. Double click it. Ooh, go.
That's the first one I do what?
Okay.
Sacred Ground is a video about
Oh, that's the first one?
That's the first one. Yep.
That's when he's done. I click.
And it's out.
Oh, there's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then when the next time you come up again, let's put the second one.
I'll see it on.
Double click it. Ooh.
Will automatically play.
Huh?
Will automatically play that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. But I'll be around. Yeah. And while you're doing it, I'll watch it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.